We are really excited about starting this new series in Joshua. The whole process of watching this nation that had been stuck for so long start to move despite the obstacles that they had. And then the applications for us as we kind of get to know what they went through and then what that might mean for us. But it's very difficult for us just to plop you down into the place in the Old Testament and say, okay, here we go, without saying really, here we are. And where are we exactly? And so tonight I want to just take the opportunity to be able to kind of establish a context for us when we get to the book of Joshua. A lot of times when you go to the Old Testament, it's a pretty confusing thing. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how it all relates together and where to go and how the books are. And some of the books seem to be repetitive and other books seem to be completely disjointed and out of order. And so I want to just take a chance to get you familiar with tonight the first 6 books of the Bible. So we've got quite a task to get kind of draw a context there so that when we get going in Joshua, we'll kind of know and understand where the nation of Israel is and where they are so that we can draw good applications in terms of where we are. We'll also take a look at Joshua and some of the very first portraits of what we'd come to know about this young man before he came into leadership and what set him apart from others. So if you get a handout out, it would be very helpful for you, I think, for you tonight to kind of start to think about an overview of the Old Testament in terms of how it gets started. If you think about it this way, think about it in terms of books, and we'll switch over. I'm going to just write some different things in here. But if you think about it in terms of books, you've got the first 6 books in the Old Testament, the first 5 really belonging together. They have been always bunched together in what's called the Pentateuch, and they're attributed to being written by Moses, all 5 of these books. Now, if you think about it this way, let me give you kind of some key words. When you think about the book of Genesis, I want you to think about beginnings. All the kinds of things that are going on, we see over and over stuff start to happen in the book of Genesis. We see how mankind begins. We see how governments begin, countries begin. We see why languages exist, and there's a division between people. Things go really poorly. There's a flood. And then in chapter 12, we are introduced to this man named Abram, who eventually becomes Abraham. Abraham is told in Genesis 12 that he's going to be the father of many nations, and from his seed, God will bless the whole world. He will bring a savior to mankind, and as early as, actually earlier than this, but it's certainly in Genesis 12, there's this covenant between God and this people group, and in this people group, God is going to bring the redemption and salvation to the world. Now, it doesn't go the way Abraham really wanted it to. It takes a long time to finally have a kid. And you can read about all of that and catch up on all that. But Abraham is kind of our first kind of starting point in terms of this nation of Israel. Now he has a son, actually a couple of sons from different folks. But the one we want to talk about is Isaac. And the blessing comes through Isaac, not Ishmael. And then Isaac has a son, Jacob. And Jacob is a deceiver and a conniver and a manipulator and all of these kind of crazy things that he does. But in the midst of it, he eventually comes to a place in Genesis 32 where he wrestles with God and God changes his name. And do you know what his name becomes? Israel. Now, Jacob has a ton of sons, a ton of different sons, and they are just like all other men in the Bible. And if you work through Genesis, you realize that God doesn't have much to work with. And he still doesn't really today. And that we take great encouragement from that. If he could get stuff going with these folks, he could certainly use us in our time. But one particular son stands out, and his name is Joseph. Joseph gets sold into slavery. He goes into Egypt and actually sets the course for what happens as a nation. Now let's go to Google Earth. You guys know that I like Google Earth. What's this up here telling me something? I don't want it. Get out of here. Let's go to Jerusalem. and into the Holy Land here. Now, what happened, all of that early part, Abraham was actually from over in here, Ur of the Chaldees, and he comes across over into the Holy Land, usually up north first, and then comes down in and settles in here, all different kinds of spots, moving around, very transient, moving around, digging lots of wells, establishing different family members. And then when Joseph comes along, he gets sold into slavery, and he's sold over into Egypt into slavery. Now, later on, we've got this amazing famine that comes that actually God knew was happening and coming in advance, and has placed Joseph now in a very strong position of leadership, and allows for the nation of Israel, Jacob and all of his family members, to eventually come to Egypt and stay and survive the plague. The nation is saved because of the provision of God, placing Joseph there, and they have immediately very good favor with the Egyptians because of Joseph's place of position. And so they all relocate down to here to Egypt, and that basically becomes about 70 people. So if you can imagine 70 folks that happened there. And they go to Egypt, and they do really well in some ways. In fact, they do so well that the Egyptians begin to mistreat them, and they eventually put them into slavery. Now, what doesn't make sense is that the next time you read about what's going on in Exodus, that this nation has changed dramatically. You're thinking 70 people, what's the problem? Here's the problem, is that they're no longer 70 people, because there has been, I didn't want that one, 400 years between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. When you see the book of Exodus, this is an easy one for you to think. In Genesis, you're going to think what? Beginnings. In Exodus, you're going to think exit. Okay? By the time we get to Exodus, the nation of Israel is now 2 to 2.5 million. They are a humongous workforce in the Egyptian culture. The whole process here, we're introduced to a major character that I've already said is kind of the one who will dominate these 4 books here. The dominating voice is Moses. Okay? So that you think now, if you can just think Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, you can kind of think your way through most of the book of Genesis and things beginning. Now, if you want to get more information, you can go in and try to remember who their wives were and what their sons and how many, all that goes on. But you can work your way through with just those 4 names. Then you get to Exodus, and you know that's about the exit. It's about the Jews leaving Egypt and going to the Promised Land. That's what that book is about. In the midst of that, God says, I'm going to set them apart in a very unique way, and so I'm going to give them some ways that I want them to relate to one another, and we'll call that the law. The whole book of Leviticus is where God meets with Moses and says, here's how you're going to be different. And there are all kinds of ways that this nation is different in terms of how they eat, what they eat, the festivals they keep, the amount of days they work every week. All of those kinds of things are set apart here in this law, and the Deuteronomy, which comes later, is really a second law. Both of these books are given in law. In fact, Leviticus is the place, if you start in January and say, I'm going to read the Bible this year, Leviticus is one of the places, if not there, Deuteronomy, that you usually quit. Because you're reading about what food they ought to eat and how big a building ought to be and all of these kinds of things, all of these requirements that are very tough to get through. God has purposes behind all of them, but they're very hard to get through when you're first reading through the Old Testament. These are the places that will hang you up. And so you've got this Exodus and the people moving out, and we get introduced to Moses and also to Joshua during this Exodus, during this moving out. Numbers, something happens here in between these books, and I'll show you that in just a minute, because Joshua is a major player in what happens. Basically, the people rebel, and Numbers is about wandering. It's the time that they're in the desert. They're going to be wandering around, and all of the tough things that happen in the desert as they are waiting to get into the promised land. Basically, God says something's got to happen because of your sin, and because of that sin, you're going to do this. So the way it looks in Google Earth for us is this. Is that in this area, we knew they were in Egypt. They were over in here. They come down and they cross over. In this area right in here would have been a Red Sea crossing. They would have come across, and they would have come down into this area here, and that would have been the mountain that Moses would have gone on to where he would have gotten the law. You can see that this area right in here is very mountainous. To give you a little bit of a terrain picture. Sorry, my mouse got crazy. Right there. So they came into this mountainous area. They received the law. Some things go bad as they're heading their way up towards the promised land, which is now north up in here. And so they'll end up kind of turning, and it's kind of argued about where they go because it all looks pretty bad. They wander around in this area, even way out into this area. You can see there is nothing. And they end up wandering around for 40 years. 40 years in the desert, waiting to get into the promised land. Now, as you think about that, think about a group of people, 2 million large, camping in the desert. They say, people that have done more research on this than me, that if they were to camp out according to the way it's described in the Old Testament, they probably took a campsite about 20 square miles. The size of Saratoga and Los Gatos. And they are led by what is called the Shekinah glory. It is God's presence, literally, there with the people during the day. It is a large cloud. I believe it to be a cloud the size so that everyone in the camp is in shade. It's how they live in the desert for 40 years. They have shaded by God's presence, this giant cloud. And whenever the cloud moves, they follow it. Whenever they find themselves in sun, they walk towards shade. And then if the cloud stops, they stop, pitch the tent. If they get the tent half up and the cloud starts to move again, they move again. They are teaching and being taught and learning every day that they've got to follow after God and be obedient to Him. And then at night, it's a pillar of fire. I think it is a pillar of fire large enough for all 2 million to see. So it's not some little campfire. I think that pillar of fire provides some instruction for them in terms of some light and also instruction in terms of when to move, because sometimes the pillar would move at night and they would move as well. So are we now kind of understand where we're at? Okay, so let's go back to this. Genesis, if I talk to you about Genesis, you would say it's a book of Exodus is a book about the exit. And then Numbers would be the book about wandering. The books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy are the books about law. And then when you get to the book of Joshua, that's when you want to think of conquer. This is when they are going to move into the land of Israel, of the promised land, and begin to conquer and take the land that they've been promised. They've been waiting 40 years to do this. Now, just to put you in a context, we think that Moses' ministry was really about doing several things. What his ministry was mostly about during the end of his years, the last 40 years, what his ministry was mostly about was about funerals. They are wandering in the desert 40 years, waiting for everyone who was old enough during the rebellion to die. And they're following the cloud by day, the fire by night, and they are having manna burgers every evening. Okay? Are we good? Now, let's take a look at Joshua, because Joshua shows up in some very cool ways. And there's some things that we can know about him, although not as much as you would think until he's in control. Joshua shows up first. Everyone is a slave when they leave Egypt, and he becomes a special servant to Moses. If you look at Numbers chapter 11, Verse 28, and it says that, and Joshua, the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth. So we have this understanding that he serves as some kind of a servant to Moses. He's one of Moses' right-hand assistants. I don't know how he got chosen for that. I don't know what kind of abilities he had and displayed in how he got chosen. This is obviously a position of very much importance. Moses is the guy, and this guy, Joshua, follows him around, and he is his servant. So he goes then from slave to servant, and then from servant, he goes to soldier. One of the very first battles that the nation of Israel is involved with while Moses is still there is against these guys called the Amalekites. And you're familiar with this story if you've ever been around in church, because the Jews were winning as long as Moses held his staff up in the air, remember? And if his arms got tired, he put it down, they started getting whooped. And so somebody came along and helped him hold up his arms. Now watch this. In Exodus, that's where that battle's going on. Exodus 17, verse 8. Amalek came and fought with Israel. And so Moses said to Joshua, son of Nun, our guy, choose for us men and go out and fight with this dude. And tomorrow I'll stand on top and I'll hold up my stick. Loose translation. So the next time that we see where this guy is really given some responsibility, we already know he's a right-hand man and an assistant to Moses. He is also now, when they fight a battle, he's chosen. So he's chosen to go out and among the guys, pick you some dudes you know that can fight and go whoop this guy that's giving us a hard time. The battle goes strange in that they win a little bit, then they'll lose, and they win, and they lose. And then finally, as long as Moses keeps his hands up, we see that gets going okay. Now, let me show you another picture of him. In Exodus chapter 24, and remember the book of Exodus is about exit. It's about leaving. They have now left, and in Exodus 24, Moses is going up, and he's going to be given the law and that mountain that I showed you. And on that mountain, he's going to be given the 10 Commandments, and here's what we learn about this. The Lord said to Moses, come on up on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. So Moses, verse 13 of chapter 24, Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, wait here. So as they go up, the top elders all wait, but as he continues on the rest of the way, only one guy that we know of goes with him, Joshua. Joshua's guarding, standing at a distance, watching all of the things and the receiving, hearing the thunder and all of the things that are going on there, and then seeing Moses come out of the wherever he was with tablets of stone. And probably Moses, being older, said, help me carry these. And Joshua is right there at that time. Now, he goes from soldier to spy. In chapters 13 and 14 of Numbers, remember Numbers is about wandering. Chapters 13 and 14 is where everything goes bad for Moses and the folks there, this nation of Israel. They have come, remember they went down to the mount, got the tablets, they came up towards north, towards the promised land, and they are poised and ready to go into the promised land and take it. God says, before you go, I want you to send some spies over there so they can tell you just how great this place is I'm about to give you. And so Moses chooses 12 spies, one from each tribe to represent the whole people group, and they go into the nation of Israel. With me so far? When they go into the nation of Israel, they see that this is an amazing piece of land. Everything is really fantastic there, but the people there seem very strong, especially to 10 folks. And so they come back, and they give a report, a mixed report. Joshua and a guy named Caleb say, the land is great and we can take it. The other 10 say the land is great, and they use the phrase, and we are like grasshoppers in their eyes. Translation, we don't have a chance against these dudes. They're going to kill us. The people all rally to the 10 and that report. And after that report, the people begin to complain and they rebel. Let me show you a little bit of that. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces as the people were rebelling before the assembly of the congregation and the people of Israel. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Zephaniah. You say, if you don't really know how to say a word, there's a clue. You just say it real fast. Zephaniah. I don't know if that's how you say it. Who were among those who had spied out the land, and they tore their clothes and said to all the congregation, the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. So Moses is listening to this report, and Joshua stands in front of the people and says, do not fear. This is a great land. You guys, you can't believe how good God has been. We will kick them. We're going to take this. The people rebel. They go with the report of the 10, and this is what God says to them. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing, I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number, listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall enter the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb, son of Zephaniah, and Joshua, praise God, son of Nun. Not N-O-N-E. N-U-N. So you got the picture now? Are we all set? What happens is Exodus is about wandering. They have gone up to the promised land. They're set to attack. The spies go across. They come back with this mixed report, and they say, if we go in there, we're going to die, and our children will be slaves. And God says, here's what I'll do for you. You are going to die. You're going to wander in this wilderness, in this desert, desolate place for 40 years. That's how long it takes until every person 20 years old and older is dead. He is going to completely purge the people of every single person that was old enough to be a part of this decision, with the exception of two people, and they were Joshua and Caleb. Those two folks will help lead them in. Now, imagine, if you would, the preparation time now for Joshua at this point, we aren't told this yet, but eventually we're going to see that he's going to be the leader. And his preparation time is really basically wandering around in a nasty, waterless place with people who are griping every single day, and he is simply waiting for everyone he knows and loves to die. That's his call. That's his responsibility. When he moves the people of Israel in, everyone he knows and loves that was his age will be dead. His wife, his best friends, his mentor Moses. And he will take a bunch of young whippersnappers into this land and try to possess it. That's where we are. When we get to the book of Joshua, we realize that it starts with, let me just show you. After Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, we have Joshua. And verse 1 says this, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, let's go. Now, what kinds of things, what stands out in Joshua's life that we could learn from somehow in terms of how we can move forward? We don't have a whole lot of snapshots about what's going on with Joshua. We don't know why he was chosen for the position that he has. We were able to work our way through slave to servant to soldier to spy and to see the judgment that comes in Numbers 13 and 14 that he was a part of, and to see all of that, but we don't really know how he ended up getting where he was. But I want to show you two small little snapshots. One of them I've kind of already shown you. But one of them that I haven't looked at yet that was about his private life. If I go back with you to Exodus 33, what would happen is that whenever the Shekinah glory would stop and God wanted to have a meeting with Moses to instruct him about what was going on with the people, the Shekinah glory, either the cloud or the fire, would go and hover right over the tent of meeting, right in the center of this giant camp. And as the glory of God and the presence of God was there, Moses would go in there and meet with God. And it says in verse 11 of Exodus 33, the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And when Moses would come out of those meetings, he would be literally glowing with the presence of God on his face. And he would instruct the people in the ways of God. And we know what he instructed them in because we have the two books of the law. The first one is Leviticus, and the second one is Deuteronomy. So he was instructing them, and Moses was receiving this instruction and passing it on to the people. Now watch this. Here's a little snapshot of what's going on privately with Joshua. When Moses turned again into the camp from the tent, his assistant Joshua, son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So whenever the presence of God goes to the tent of meeting and Moses is called to this meeting to meet with God as a friend face to face with God, we know that someone else was in those meetings. We only know of one other someone else, Joshua. Somehow he gets to go in. And when Moses left to go and instruct the people, Joshua stayed. The first thing that we see here is this amazing heart, this amazing desire and willingness to stay in the presence of God. This private love for the serving of God that allows him to be the public man that we eventually meet in the book of Joshua. I want to tell you, men and women, no folks are used greatly publicly unless God has done a great work in them privately. And we see here that from just a little phrase that Joshua has a great heart for the presence of God. Let me ask you, I want you to just kind of think, because that's where Joshua is, and now I want to ask, where are we? I mean, and the purpose here is just for us to be able to kind of put a spot on the map and say, you are here. This is where I am now privately with what's going on. Would you be the kind of person who in the presence of God passes by? There were 2 million people that stayed outside of the tent and just passed by. Would you be one of the kinds of people who might visit the presence of God, might go in towards the presence, but as soon as Moses would leave, then you'd leave? I mean, you'll come to worship services occasionally, and you'll be a part of the gatherings of the people of God, but you really never feel like part of the family here. You're just visiting. You're glad we're here, and you're glad to have a spot to come. This isn't really where you feel like you would call home. The presence of God is not something that you really gravitate towards. You visit it, but the truth be known, you visit it when you need something or when you have a sense of something missing. Or would you be the kind of person that actually lingers in God's presence? You could pass by, you could visit, or maybe linger there. Linger in the presence of God. Imagine that, and there's a great advantage for the Jewish people in this situation because they know exactly where God is. There's a giant fire marking the spot. There's a big cloud telling them when to move. In some ways, it's a huge advantage. Shekinah means that which dwells with us. So Shekinah glory is that God dwells with us. The change for us now as New Testament believers is that actually God dwells within us. And the same glory, we are told, the same power that raised Christ from the dead dwells within each of his children. What are you doing with that presence that dwells within you? Where would you place yourself on a continuum? Would you be someone who at this point is just passing by, or someone who maybe visits occasionally, or maybe someone who would linger there? Joshua's private life, the thing that sets him apart clearly is the whole situation with the spies. And I told you that story. His private, we see him fight a fight, but other generals fight fights. We see him guard Moses, but other people were guarding Moses. The place that he gets set apart is when he is sent into the land to spy it out. And to find out how good the land is, he came back and said, the land is great, and since God is for us, we will take them. Something happened privately that translated into his public life that gave him a tremendous confidence. If I were to ask you, what is your public life like? Would it be one who cowers like the 10 spies? Or one who goes along with the crowd? I'm sure of the 10, some of them maybe thought, maybe Joshua's right, but I'm going to go with the crowd. Do you find yourself more and more often publicly going with the crowd? Your decisions being based on what is either politically correct or popular in terms of what is taught? Or would you say that you're a person of courage? A person who says, God said this privately, and I'm going to bank on it. I'm going to bank on it publicly. Next week, we're going to have an opportunity to take a look at just how important courage is in terms of following after our God. And that he asked nothing less than we would all be people of courage. Tonight, our dream, our hope is that we would build some time for you around communion, and that you would take the time to just ask, where am I now? We've actually built in a part of communion. We'll see how it goes. There's some sheets on the tables. They're supposed to be like topographical maps. So use your imagination with that. And there are pins there. If you have a strong sense of where you are, what the parenthesis around this time of your life is, maybe you would mark a spot. Say, here, this is where I am. And you would just write out what that spot is. Maybe you're a brand new parent, or in the first couple of years of being a parent. Maybe you're a brand new married couple. You would say, newly married. Bless you. I put down on mine, empty nest. That's the transition I feel like I'm in terms of my personal life, is working and navigating what it means to be in a home alone with my wife, with kids no longer there. Might be some of you would say, recently divorced. Might be that some would say, recently lost a loved one. Newly moved, transplanted to San Jose. Whenever you're lost in the mall, you can't get where you want to go till you know where you are. Have you ever noticed that? The store's really all, especially for guys. I don't know, women, maybe you've got a different sense about it. You can kind of figure out where to go. But I've noticed that when I'm in the mall with guys, at least my two sons, that all the stores seem to look alike. All the levels of the mall look alike. I am desperately looking for a kiosk that tells me, you are here. Because once I know where I am, then I can figure out which direction to go sometimes. But I've at least got some kind of a chance. Otherwise, I walk to Neiman Marcus, and then I'm walking to Sears, and I can't remember which exit I came in on, and it all looks the same. Our goal tonight around communion time would be just an honest reflection with the Lord to say, where am I, God? Where am I privately with you? Where am I? Do you like the place that you are? We'll talk about how to move forward, and maybe God will even give you some understanding about how to move forward, but the whole series is about moving in the face of obstacles, how the nation of Israel moves, and they have some serious baggage. Every leader they've counted on is now dead. And they're going into a land that the people who they counted on before were too afraid to go into. But they knew where they were. Where are you? Where are you publicly? Are you the kind of person that cowers or goes along with the crowd? Or would you say, I'm a person of courage? Here's where I can tell you. Here's where you are in the eyes of God. You are completely forgiven. You are deeply loved. And you are reconciled to God through the work of Jesus Christ if you have placed your faith in him. So you may not be where you want to be privately. I understand that. You may not be where you hope and want to be publicly. I certainly understand that. There are days when I look at my life and say, I am nowhere near where I thought I would be. It's like the song in Les Miserables. I always dreamed my life would be so different than the hell I'm living. But in the eyes of God, you are completely forgiven, deeply loved, and reconciled into great relationship with him. During communion, I would ask you not to rush into it. That you would give yourself some time to at least emotionally and mentally walk up to the kiosk of your life and mark where you are. Courageously, honestly. Nobody's going to ask you anything. You're going to write on here, but we're not going to ask you to put your initials by anything. Mark's going to take these things and turn them in some kind of display that we'll see during the whole series. I don't know if it'll be up there or somewhere. Mark, you know how Mark will figure out something good. But tonight could be a time where we evaluate and begin with an X on the map. Says, here's where we are. By God's grace, we're going to move. We're going to move to where he leads us. You can come and take the elements, take them back to your seat if you'd like, and take them there. I would encourage you to. There's only 2 tables, so if you want to write, you can work all the way around on both sides of the map and write anything that might come to your mind. Let me pray for you, and then we'll celebrate communion together. God, regardless of where we are, you already know that. And you have forgiven us for the times we have turned aside, and you have provided for us the kind of encouragement. I ask that during this time, you would allow everyone here to honestly say, this is where I am. And then Spirit, Holy Spirit, come. Instruct us in a way where if there's someplace you want to move us to, we would be willing to go there. And God, I know most of the work that you need to do in me and in my brothers and sisters here is in the private life. May you create in us the kind of heart that dwells in your presence and hears from you real clearly.